Welcome back to Old Alton Links and the home of our routing challenge. Now in this video we're going to show you the courses that didn't quite make the top 5 but were still really good. I'm going to go from 12 to 5 in no particular order. We're also going to look first at some of the holes that we really wish we would see for one reason or another. Now, a disclaimer, these are not necessarily the best routings, these are just the ones that spoke to me the most and the ones that I thought I could see golf holes the most immediately on them. That does not mean to say it would be the best, that does not mean to say they haven't got flaws, just the ones that I could kind of visualize stuff happening on. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but enjoy. One of my favourite first holes was the first on Ericsson Stones. You've got a great fairway framed by dunes and little ridges, turning beautifully into the sunset, crossing the creek, but not at a distance that's really likely to come into play. But then this really cool green site on a little plateau where you can envisage a sideways green, just sitting banked into the dunes. The ninth hole on Tanner Bronson's, which was a drive ball par 4, playing down across this ridgeline to a green that's perched right on the top of the dune with danger big time left, right and long. 12th on Ryan McConnell's, featuring its beautiful texturing and lighting, a short par 4 with no discernible danger that you would always go for. The 11th on Q's, playing off that dune ridge towards a green that you can see from the tee but not necessarily from the fairway. And what I liked about this one was it came at a green site I'd always seen and envisaged, but from completely the opposite direction and therefore completely flipping how I viewed the hole. A really cool one. The second on MVP Manatees, because it's a simple par 3 in a perfect location, views of the river and the beach. The fifth on Heisenberg's, so good he put 2 tees in and occupies probably one of the best spots of any par 3s I've seen on this plot. Awesome golf hole. The 15th on McTreese's, because the holes actually look good until he puts surfaces down. This one hits over a dune ridge to a wide fairway that you can see working its way through here, towards a green that's benched into a little dune and in a really cool spot. The second on Madav 27's course would have been a 480-yard par 4 that goes blind to blind, hitting to a relatively flat fairway but over a dune, and then cresting the other dunes and playing just behind it to a tiny tucked little punch bowl green. All sorts of fun on a long approach shot. Hole 14, more of the bewildering variety. You have a very blind tee shot on a par 4 that is 250 yards, where you can't see the green and there's no discernible danger around the green. It's an interesting hole decision and we can only assume it's a publish error. The 18th on Lisi's, partly because we have to reward the guy who measure tooled in the whole thing, partly because it's a really bold par 3 in a great spot and we like finishing on a par 3. And of course the third at G-Dogs with its spectacularly placed trees. So first of all, in our top 12, we've got Energizer's routing, and he decided to go away from the creek, not crutch on that, nor the beach, nor really the dunes, and instead just created a very sensible routing that explored the flatter parts of the course, and did so really well. We're going to look at a few favourites from this one. The second typifies much of what was sensible here. Moves lightly over the land, and where there is big land movement, it doesn't really come into play and will only add drama because you're always clearing that big mound. The 14th, an awesome understated par 3, on a great little spot of land with good views out over the beach. And the 18th, where you turn for home, play over the burn twice, both on the tee shot and on the approach, which would give a really interesting finishing hole. The second routing we're going to look at is a really cool one featuring all sorts of triangles and things from Skinny Post. And this one worked out to the ocean a number of different times across the round and really featured it in a cool way as it works kind of out and then back, but with all sorts of loops and interest. Only just missing the top 5 because of a couple of slightly quirky holes like the 9th and a couple too many crossovers. The second hole cuts right the way across the plot. It's a long par 4 on relatively flat land on the tee shot before it starts moving more and more, and then the green is set just into this little ridgeline. The fourth tee shot, sharing a corridor with the third. Here you hit to a wide open fairway before you get another view of the ocean as you hit through this little corridor of dunes. The 14th, the plateau green to end all plateau greens. You hit a blind tee shot just over to this landing zone. We hit a flip wedge, one would imagine, up to this very exposed green above the river. A really strong entry as expected by Pithy Dr. G. This one featured a number of triangles as you tacked your way out to the far corner of the plot before you raced your way for home, and that closing stretch is one that deserves being featured in its entirety. A long par 3 on the 15th as you make your way here. You then worked up to the top of the dune. 16. Par 5 working its way through towards a slightly hidden dell style green. You then popped your way up to the top of the dune again before you played a short par 4 to a shared green with the second, And finally, 18, again from atop the dune ridge and over the river, featured a long par 5, well, short par 5 to a green just at the base of that dune ridge. From one you probably expected to one you maybe didn't. The next one is the OG Andre or Canuck. Now, his featured a clubhouse right in the middle of the plot with no clear way to get to it, but you could have worked a road across, and some really interesting holes that worked their way through the dune ridge. The second of back-to-back par 5s, the 6 plays over a little dune towards a big valley before you hit up and over again towards a green that's just on rumpled land with all sorts of interest around it. 5s on this course were generally in really interesting locations, with the 10th hitting across some of the wildest land on the course before you face an approach shot over a dune ridge towards a green that has way more flat space around it than it might look when you're playing into it. It would give a really interesting second shot. And finally, you had the 13th, which played off this kind of side hill. So you'd hold on to the high side of the fairway for a look into a green that just seems to be hanging on the edge of that side of the dune. Next entry from JC Huntrays, and this one from Trays, as expected, features a bundle of quirk. There were some really cool holes here, and I thought the par 3s in particular stood out. The first one to feature is the third, which is just a little flick of a wedge at 120 that gives great views over a number of different holes. One of those holes you would have seen would have been the 8th, which gets a long par 4 but has a big wide open area for you to hit a tee shot into before a green that's touched just the other side of a ridgeline, where you can imagine easily feeding a ball off slopes on the right hand side towards the pin. Finally, the 13th got a great look in kind of Pacific Dunes style, with a green nestled between these little humps and hollows, and for a long par 3 you could imagine that working really nicely. One of my absolute favourites was this course from In This Star, which was a designer I'm not that familiar with, but came out with some awesome stuff on this plot, veering from very extreme holes to really kind of subtle uses of the land. The 5th hole is the first that we're going to look at, and at kind of a short / mid par 4, there was an interesting fairway. You could use all sorts of undulations here, but the green was a perfect green site. You had the dune on the left and the big fall off on the right. You could put anything here and make it a really good hole. 11 and 12 was a combination of green sites that many people had. A lot of people worked up and into this bowl before putting a par 3 down the other side. Perhaps a little bit on the extreme side, but certainly memorable. And finally, we had 16, which had a really flat fairway on a short par 4, but nearer the green, you had all this interesting broken ground that I thought would be very cool to see how you used, and a green site just nestled in amongst those. You could see a really cool disconnected. Rounding out our top 12, but not quite top 5, is Sleepy Panda, who definitely cheated by burying a ton of ash trees, as we can see here. His routing was really interesting, though. It crisscrossed a couple of times and worked out all the way the reverse to most other people, and then back in with a couple of loops. There's actually that congested middle part of the course that I thought was the best. 7th sees you go down to a wide fairway out to the right before heading up towards this green perched on. Coming back from that dune ridge, you have the 10th, which plays more inland before you hit over here, and then you have a slightly hidden green on the other side of a dune, depending on how far you hit it, but a large green. Finally, rounding out this trio of interconnected holes was the 13th, which played down the side of the river. You'd hit down and then up over towards, again, the tip of that dune ridge. And the way these 3 holes played off that same area was really interesting. So that's our 12 through 6. Stay tuned, we'll be revealing the top 5 shortly, and those ones will be in order. Enjoy.